Welcome back to Close Up. It is a big weekend for Democrats as they hold one of their major annual fundraisers and welcome a potential presidential contender in Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, who will be delivering the keynote address at the McIntyre-Shaheen 100 Club dinner. This morning, we welcome in New Hampshire Democratic Party Chairman Ray Buckley. Ray, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So for those of us who live and breathe the First in the Nation primary, this is one of those big early events where we usually potentially get to see someone who's going to be dipping their toe into those White House waters. And obviously, J.B. Pritzker is someone a lot of Democrats have been talking about. You know, what does he bring to the table as Democrats try to harness a lot of this anti-Trump energy that's building out there?
Well, he's really a twofer. On one hand, he's got an amazing record as governor of Illinois. But two, there are few people that have been stronger in holding Donald Trump accountable than J.B. Pritzker. He does not shy back. You know, he gets out there and says it the way it is. And I think a lot of Democrats really see that as something that they believe needs to be done and said, and so that's why we've got over 800 people coming.
Yeah, without naming names, what was the demand like on the speaker side this time around? Everybody's kind of wondering, what will the New Hampshire primary look like for Democrats in 2028? Are you seeing candidates who wanted to come here beyond just, I'm sorry, not a candidate, potential candidates who wanted to come here beyond Governor Pritzker?
It was people knew that the dinner was coming because it comes every year. It has since 1959. And so more than a few people contact us, say, well, you know, my boss would be interested in speaking. But we decided to let's give the first shot. There's plenty of events between now and February of 2028.
Yeah, so the invisible primary begins. You have a new DNC chairman. You supported him. To what extent do you think this new leadership is willing to continue what the old leadership did in terms of really sticking it to New Hampshire in that primary calendar?
Well, I think that you'll see that Chairman Martin is not going to put the thumb on the scales, and that's all we need. If we have an amazing message and story on why we should remain first, and if it's a level playing field, we're going to be all set.
What about the Rules and Bylaws Committee? Obviously, the last time we heard all these bizarre things about there were no dirt roads in New Hampshire. I think somebody called us a bunch of college-educated techies. The reasons they gave for taking the primary away seemed really strange. What is the likelihood that you're stuck in the same position again, though? Because not a lot of people like to admit mistakes and change in politics, that you end up having to do this DIY sort of bizarre primary again.
I was there with you when that was said, and it's like, I grew up on a dirt road in Canterbury, so you know, people are born on dirt roads and live on dirt roads in New Hampshire. But the point being is that there's going to be a new Rules and Bylaws Committee. Chair Martin's going to be announcing his picks right around Memorial Day, give or take a week, and I think you'll see a new membership, and so I don't think the majority of the Rules and Bylaws Committee are going to be people that served previously.
Okay, well, that's something we'll definitely keep an eye on. You know, as we look at the political scene out there right now, obviously a lot of anti-Trump energy that's building. We're seeing almost an accelerated version of what happened in 2017 into 2018. But the polling shows a lot of frustration with Democrats as well. Why do you think we see Democratic favorability cratering alongside President Trump?
Well, I think there was a lot of disappointment. I mean, the hope that left the National Convention, we were absolutely believing that we were in a new era and that we were going to address a number of issues that people very passionately care about. And then we were all surprised on Election Day to see that that wasn't. I mean, obviously, we're very proud that we were able to carry the state for Vice President Harris. We're the only battleground state to do it, and we received the least amount of support than any state. So that's a testament to our grassroots ground operation here in New Hampshire, that we pulled it off without the support that the 7 other states received.
You know, 2 years ago at this time, you had a declared candidate for mayor of Manchester and 2 candidates emerging for governor. One was an exploratory phase, the other one, we basically knew who was going to run. Not so this time around. What's going on? Where are the Democrats running for these major offices?
Well, having lots of conversations. People don't feel that there is a rush, especially right now where the U.S. Senate and the 1st Congressional District, and until Congresswoman Goodlinger's announcement, there was a wonder if there might be a primary in the 2nd Congressional District as well. So a lot of people are considering it. But, you know, the Republicans don't have an announced candidate for Congress in the 1st District or an announced candidate for U.S. Senate either.
Yeah, a lot of people, I guess, taking the wait-and-see approach. But, you know, you're a Manchester guy. The Manchester situation in particular is an interesting barometer. You know, Democrats hold the advantage in this city, but Governor Ayotte won here. You've got Mayor Rouet. Senator Soucy lost in an upset. In the Queen City, it seems you're seeing in real time a lot of the issues the Democrats have been having with working-class voters. What steps are you taking to address what looks to be an emerging kind of five-alarm fire politically for Democrats here?
No, I think the city of Manchester has a number of potential leaders, and I think that people are trying to avoid an expensive primary, and so they just want to talk with folks. You know, I think the school board and the aldermen represent the values of the people of Manchester. That's why they get elected. We hope to expand our majority on the Board of Aldermen and take back the mayor's race. And whole, you know, right now it's I think it's 12-2 on the school board. So I guess we could expand the school board, but there's not much left there.
Yeah, it seems like these days in New Hampshire politics, especially in the high-profile races, it's all about who the candidate is, not necessarily the R or the D. You find the right person, they're going to make that connection and win. But, you know, there were some effective arguments that were made against Democrats in the 2024 cycle. So what is your party doing to steel itself against that three-pronged attack that Republicans keep using in the border security, crime, and then transgender issues?
Well, I mean, the real issue is the economy, and that's what people are concerned about. And they're seeing the destruction that the New Hampshire Republicans' budget, the proposed budget, would do here in New Hampshire. They're seeing in real time what Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing on the national level. People are horrified and they're angry, and there are people that are coming out that have never come out before. We're literally seeing thousands upon thousands of people just taking to the streets, and there's an energy that's happening. We're winning special elections from coast to coast around the country, and clearly Republicans in New Hampshire are very nervous since they refused to even have a special election in the town of Salem. That's unprecedented. You'd have a vacancy for the legislature for nearly 2 full years.
So you don't think, though, that, I mean, the anti-Trump thing can be a Band-Aid on a lot of other underlying issues. You don't think that the Democrats need to recalibrate at all on some of those other issues they were attacked on in the last cycle?
Well, I think that it's important that we do have a strong, positive message, talking about the economy, talking about education, talking about health care, and safety, frankly. And I think that you're going to see that in candidates for local office, candidates for state office and federal.
You know, you mentioned public safety, and that is a key one for voters that can mitigate against all kinds of other issues. You know, and the distance among some Democrats and the people really continues to grow. I wanted to point out, you know, something that happened at the State House this last week. You had Democrats unanimously oppose in committee legislation to increase prison sentences for child sex traffickers. One Democratic rep saying about this bill, quote, "I just don't see the point. It's what I would call would-be-nice legislation. I don't think there's a real need." What swing voter is getting on board with that kind of message?
Well, I'm not familiar with that piece of legislation, so I can't really comment on the details, but I bet you there's something in the details that...
It's literally prison sentences going from 7 to 14 years. That's it. It's clean.
Well, as I said, I haven't looked at it, so I really can't comment.
You talk about the playbook, the ground game. The fact that you guys did that same thing and it didn't work, doesn't that indicate, though, that it's the candidates that are weak?
Well,
because it works on the federal side, too, just not the local, the governor, those things.
Well, certainly the fact that our districts for the Executive Council, State Senate, and the House are gerrymandered, and it is important. You know, there's just enough voters that were upset about the economy, did not feel that we were properly addressing the economy to tilt the election. It was a very close election, and we feel very good that 2026 is going to be a very good year. It's a midterm year. History would point to a very successful year here in New Hampshire, and I think that it's going to be a good year. We're seeing evidence of a growing and building movement to stand up to both the Republican budget here in New Hampshire and Donald Trump on the national level.
As we wrap up, what is your perspective on this David Hogg situation? He's sort of wanting to run this operation of taking out older Democrats. The party has said you can either be with us or you can do this on your own. What is your perspective?
Well, I know both Ken Martin, our chair, and David Hogg, one of our vice chairs. Both of them are incredibly talented men, and I believe that they'll work this out.
All right. New Hampshire Democratic Party Chairman Ray Buckley, thanks for joining us on Close Up.
Thank you.
Appreciate the time. And we will be right back with the fight over immigration policy at the State House, why reps are squaring off over who should be dictating cooperation with federal officials. Stay with us.